Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. Do we have any apologies for absence, Neil?
Apologies from Beth Rowland, Chair, and Carol Jewell is here as a substitute.
Thank you. Okay, let's look at the minutes of the previous meeting. Anyone have any comments on page 5? Page 6? And page 7? No? Everybody happy? Can we have a show of hands? Okay. Thank you. Right. Are there any declarations of interest about any of the items today? Nope. And Neil, are there any questions?
No questions of any denomination, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, so on to item 30, the Leader and Chief Executive update. Over to you.
Okay.
I think Susan's going to start, and then I'll...
Okay, great. Thanks, Susan.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So hopefully you have a copy of the presentation in front of you. And when we've previously come to this committee, we've talked about the challenges and our responses to those challenges. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about those responses, because I'm sure you've got lots of questions about a number of the items on this presentation. But in terms of the fair funding review, Stephen's going to cover that as part of the presentation, so I won't touch on that right now. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about is that obviously in terms of what's happened over the last 6 months is we've had the council plan, that's been agreed, that came to council. We've got an EDI policy, that was agreed as well. And so where actually at the heart of it is about fairness and creating opportunities for people to thrive. So that's at the heart of our council plan. So something else that was adopted over the last 6 or so months has been the community's vision. Again, that came to council. You agreed that at council, and that was something that went through a great deal of co-production through many within our community. So that was good to see. We have continued with our strategic relationship with Reading University. That's a really strong relationship. And in here it talks about the corporate parent partnership framework, which has been agreed. And I think what's worth pointing out is the CQC inspection that took place for adult services. The CQC judged that partnerships in this area are outstanding. So that was really fantastic to get that as part of the CQC review of adult services. Something that we continue to do is really focus on early intervention, because I think it's really important that we take a corporate approach to addressing some of the key issues that we've got. Not only do they get better outcomes for residents, but we also can save money as well at the same time. So one of those is around specialist accommodation. So that's providing, for example, specialist accommodation for people with learning disabilities, or for people who are homeless and maybe in B&B. So it's really important that we have this pipeline of accommodation that means, as I say, better outcomes for residents and also saving money. So in terms of further progress, if you go on to the next slide, Neil, that is, it's about making an impact, and it takes you through the last 6 months. Obviously before that we came with other actions that have been undertaken. So within this, it's a real focus on what's happened over the last 6 or so months. And I think that a big piece of work that will impact on a number of people is about the South Wokingham Distributor Road. That's a significant piece of infrastructure, but it's really important to unlock housing in the borough. The economic development strategy has also been agreed, so that's a really positive piece of work. And I think that something else which is good for our children and young people is that we've got a children's home that was Ofsted registered. That's something that's owned and managed by the council. So again, better outcomes for those children and young people, and also saves us money because those young people are actually in our borough, and we're not actually providing funding for private companies. So something else that's really good and that we had over the last 6 months, we purchased a second care home. So this is Holly's. We've talked previously about purchasing Bluebell. So it's great. We've got 2 care homes, again, better outcomes for our residents and saves funding, because you'll know we have got financial challenges, and Stephen will talk more about further financial challenges we have on the horizon. The Prevention and Youth Justice Service really gets really good outcomes. I won't go into the detail here, but also you had that plan that came to council last week about the Youth Justice Service, and where they were commended by Ofsted as well. And this also talks about, if we think about the town centre, we've got new businesses that are coming into, for example, Wokingham Town Centre. Good, that's positive. We can see in other parts of the country where that's just not happening. So it's great to see new businesses coming into the area. In this slide, we also talk about the fact that the council was shortlisted for Council of the Year, and that's a real positive step, a real great outcome for our staff as well, but says something about what we actually deliver for our residents. And the actual process is quite a good thing, because as part of that we produced a video about the work that we do in partnership, and that will be used in our staff conference, which is happening in a few days' time. So I'll just finish in a moment. So some of the other things that we talked about making an impact is the Forest of Imagination. I don't know if you went to that. It was a really fantastic event. It was a free event for our communities, and lots of children and young people were engaged in that. It was really, really positive. And yeah, I know. And also, this talks about the sense efficiency statement. There's lots of different things in here that was actually agreed. So that's really important in terms of having sufficient provision for our SEND pupils. We really need that, and to be clear about what we're going to provide, because that provides us better outcomes for children and saves us money. And a lot of those being attached to mainstream schools as well, because that's really important that youngsters are educated, get what they need, but in a mainstream setting. So if I just go to the final point, I won't talk about everything, but the community lottery was launched, so get really positive for our communities, and we got a good Ofsted accreditation for the children's care home, which was actually published. And the final point that I'll make is about Gorse Ride, and more residents moving into energy efficient and cheaper run homes, which is good, and it goes back to the point that I was making about the council plan, where at the core of that is about enabling people to thrive. Well, actually having residents move into more of energy efficient and cheaper housing absolutely does help them thrive, like the sense efficiency. There's lots of things there that actually help meet our Marmot principles. So if I hand over to Stephen on that one, on the next one.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I'm going to focus on the 3 things identified as challenges for the council, and I guess you could equally well describe them as very large pieces of work that are ongoing. And if I may, I'll do them in reverse order in the way they appear in your agenda. I'm going to start with the local plan, which was submitted in February of this year, well in advance of the deadline for the transitional arrangements. It's in process of being examined. The first hearings are not going to be, unfortunately, until November, which is disappointing, but we are entirely in the control of the inspectorate, and they decide how they schedule these things. We have had the first batch of questions related to the submitted plan, which have all been answered to the satisfaction of the inspectors. There are 2 inspectors who are in charge with looking at our plan and taking it through the examination. So most of the news to tell you on the local plan, I'm afraid, is going to be something we'll report on next time, because at this stage we're just preparing, getting ourselves ready for those examination hearings in November. You can see the timeline we're anticipating in your agenda. If I can then move on to the second of the three, and that's mayoral strategic authorities. You'll be aware that the government has decided that mayoral strategic authorities should be rolled out over England. Their ambition is that all parts of England are represented in a mayoral strategic authority, and that the elected mayors sit in a council of the nations and the regions alongside government ministers. Now, that, I think, gives you a sense of how the government envisage mayoral strategic authorities, not so much as another layer of local government, but as a devolving down to regional level of some of the functions of national government to elected mayors. We have been engaged in conversations over a long period of time about what would be the appropriate area for a mayoral strategic authority that would cover our area. Initially, those discussions were with other Berkshire councils, and an expression of interest was submitted under the previous government on the scheme that they were allowing a non-mayoral route to be considered. That footprint wasn't rejected by government, but they did make clear that they wanted a mayoral route. They weren't really interested in anything else. We've therefore been working now with Oxfordshire to see whether that would be a more viable area and would actually command support. Swindon have expressed an interest in being involved. Buckinghamshire have expressed no interest in being involved at all. They would like to go their own way. How sustainable that is, we don't know. So the geographical footprint remains largely unclear, or certainly not agreed. However, a lot of work has been done on trying to prepare the ground for a future mayoral strategic authority on the basis that this is going to happen whether we like it or not. And I think our best way of preparing is to try and work together to decide on what our priorities are for the region. And I think there's broad agreement, certainly between Oxfordshire and Berkshire, what those priorities are, and they relate to strategic infrastructure, or such matters as strategic infrastructure, affordable housing, jobs and skills. We're trying to fill skills gaps in particular. So there's been a lot of good coordination, and we're making good progress in that. I think we all are agreed, we may not agree on everything, but we are all agreed on this, that whatever our initial thoughts about this process, we really should engage with it, because there are potentially some very big rewards in terms of access to money for infrastructure projects that we would not otherwise be able to get hold of. And in the context of what I'm going to move on to next, there are even greater financial challenges for the council. It would be foolish in the extreme, I think, to shut ourselves off from an opportunity to get external funding. So I think we're all agreed that that is a prize worth fighting for. We're also all agreed that there needs to be governance safeguards in place to prevent any elected mayor going off-piste and doing things that could cause harm rather than good. So we've been working also on those governance arrangements. Some of those will be dictated by the legislation, but we're also convinced that the further we get on in developing an agreed agenda for a mayoral strategic authority before a mayor is elected, the bigger our chance of being able to keep the mayor focused on that agenda and moving forward to deliver it. The final thing I need to report to you on is the one that in many ways is very time-consuming and very concerning. You, I'm sure, all know that Wokingham Borough Council for many, many years has been the lowest funded unitary council per head of population in England. That means of all those councils that provide adults and children's services, we receive the least government support. We are very heavily reliant for our income on our council tax and any other means we have of raising money locally. Extraordinarily reliant compared with most councils. However, that really difficult position looks as though it's set to be made even more difficult because the government have announced its proposal for redistributing the support it gives to local councils, and that redistribution process would see it's projected to see Wokingham lose over the next 3 years £47 million worth of central government funding. That may be an underestimate. It may go up to somewhere nearer £50 million. It may stay at 47 or go down. We're not certain yet. That this is just based on the projections derived from the algorithms that have been shared with us. But we do know that this is a pretty big change in our funding. To put it in context, over those 3 years, all of the council tax we raise, assuming we increase the council tax to the cap, which is effectively 5%, assuming a growth in our income base as new housing is built, we would anticipate that nearly all of that council tax increase would be required to fill the gap created by the loss of central government funding. We would be left with a tiny amount, nowhere near enough to cover even headline inflation figures, and headline inflation figures grossly understate the inflationary impact of service delivery on councils, the cost for councils of delivering services and of meeting contractual obligations are rising at a much higher rate than inflation, and demand increases relentlessly for services. So it is a pretty serious financial backdrop. Now, obviously, we have to plan for the worst, but we are also trying to work to mitigate what the government is proposing. We made a very early decision. There's absolutely no point in trying to deflect the government from their commitment to redistribution, because it's very clear that that's in the government's DNA. It's not going to alter. So what we have to do is try and engage with them to moderate the impact of their proposals on those councils which would be the losers. And there are about 50 other councils, 56 I think in total, who will, which will expect to have a significant reduction in spending, significant reduction in government support. What we are doing is trying to campaign by every means at our disposal, through our MPs, through networks with other councils. We are trying to, and by direct contact with government ministers, we're trying to campaign for a 4% floor on the increase in core spending power of each council. Now, core spending power, this is a strange terminology that may be unfamiliar to you. Core spending power means the government grant we get, business rates and council tax. All of those, that's core spending power. And if core spending power increases for all councils at no less than 4%, more or less all councils would be at least in a break-even position. They would not be losing out in real terms by this redistribution. Now, whether we'll get that, of course, remains to be seen, but we are campaigning on that basis to try and make sure that no council that delivers adults and children's services, a tier 1 council, ends up with a real terms cut in funding that means it cannot deliver services in the way it has done in the past. So we have been putting a lot of effort into that campaign. It's been going on over the summer. It's hotting up in the party conference season, and we're pulling out all the stops to make progress. There are a few tiny little signs that we may be getting somewhere, but I don't want to overstate it. It continues to be very hard work. Wasn't helped by a change of personnel at the top. Certainly the local government minister, Jim McMahon, was engaging with us and was showing a disposition to listen at least. And I'm sorry, in many ways he's gone. But the new Secretary of State, Steve Reed, has experience in local government. He was a London mayor before he became an MP, and London councils are very vigorously lobbying for changes because they're amongst the losers. So we have engaged with Steve Reed, and we will continue to engage with him and his ministers and with civil servants in his department. So that's probably all I need to say at this point.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, I have a question. I don't really understand sorry, I'm jumping in and asking it first. I don't really understand the second bullet on fair funding proposals.
Okay, I think as I understand this, and Graham will correct me if I'm wrong, what we've got as the first figure is the savings targets we already have to meet in the existing budgetary plans. What comes, the higher figure is the new target that we estimate will be generated by the proposals. So 7.8 million for 2026-7 becomes 13.9. And then at 9.2 becomes 23.6, 11.1 becomes 32.2. Graham might want to elaborate or correct me if I'm wrong.
No, Stephen was absolutely spot on. The key words here was that was the initial assessment. Those of you who are on community and corporate ONS will already see different figures. However, what you will see is consistent is if you look at 28-29 and you take 11 million from 32, you get 21 million is the impact of the potential fair funding in year 3, and you'll see the difference is also 21 million in the figures that you'll receive at ONS. So we've worked hard to contain growth, increase savings to get a better figure, but at the moment I'm using the same 21 million pounds by year 3 is the deficit, the additional deficit we'll face under the potential fair funding proposals.
So in essence, what you see is that what was already a challenging set of savings targets or income generation targets, those now have become even more challenging. Something like, well, more than double. So it's really, nobody can deny that the next 3 years are going to be tough.
Thank you, Stephen. Has anyone else got any more? Pauline.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, the combined mayoral authorities. I'll put on record the fact I'm extremely sceptical about any thought that there might be any devolution to the combined mayor, as this government seems to be rather dictatorial and seems to be trying to push control down. And it feels to me like mayors just might be slightly easier for them to control than lots of borough councils. But setting that to one side, a couple of questions. First, I was interested in what you saying that Oxford were more interested in, had the same direction in terms of infrastructure. And I'm wondering if they've got a view on the long-standing requirement that we have for a third Thames Bridge, which must have been going for 100 years now. And it would be very helpful if, for a change, they actually agreed with us that a third Thames Bridge was required. So I'd be interested to know if they're supporting that. The second one was about the core spending power and the 4% cap. That's all well and good, and I think it's better than nothing, although I think the whole redistribution thing is completely unacceptable, and you know that. Two questions on that. Firstly, 4% is fine, but what's the inflation on adult social care and other costs? Is it actually 4%? And what happens if inflation goes above 4%? It feels a bit like a bit of a blunt instrument in terms of its lack of link potentially to increasing inflation, or indeed inflation rates that are higher for some of our costs, like adult social care. So,
well, if I have a first stab at those, and then I'm sure Graham can put me right when I get it wrong. Well, first of all, like you, I'm a mayoral sceptic. I don't approach this I didn't approach this with enormous enthusiasm. I now realise, it is the only show on the road, so we have to just adapt and work out how we make it best for our area and try and maximise our chances of getting a good result rather than a bad one. I think the option of just standing aloof isn't really an option, because it'll just be done to us rather than our being able to have some influence over the way it works. I think your second point was about Oxfordshire's strategic priorities. I think one of the reasons I think mayoral strategic authorities are worth pursuing is precisely because those kind of very difficult issues between Oxfordshire and Berkshire may be a lot easier to resolve through this framework. So,
just to ask you to expand on that a bit, have they said that they're in favour of something that they've always been opposed to?
We haven't got that down to that level of granularity of identifying specific projects. We've agreed in areas of work. We will be working towards specific projects for funding bids, and that one will no doubt be involved, will be part of the discussion.
So you said we've got broad agreement over infrastructure, but not over that bit?
I said broad agreement that infrastructure is strategic infrastructure should be one of our priorities. And I now have forgotten what the third point was.
The third one was about inflation.
Yes, yeah. I think on the 4%, I'll let Graham pick that up in a minute. I mean, the 4% was calculated because we thought it would enable most councils not to suffer a real terms spending reduction. However, there's also another pragmatic element here. If we were to ask for 6%, I think we'd probably be laughed out of court by the government. So we have to be realistic about what may work rather than just think about ideals. I think inflation levels for adults and children's way above 4%. But we're talking about a 4% increase in core spending power, don't forget. And this is to help us cover off the inflationary impacts. I think on you made a subsidiary point there that I'm trying to remember in your first comments related to.
So it was.
Oh yes, I know what it was. It was about your opposition to redistribution. I'm not in any way saying I'm in favour of redistribution. I'm saying the government is in favour of redistribution. And if we are going to defend this area best, I think we have to acknowledge the government is very unlikely to be deflected from that core principle. So we have to persuade them to moderate the impact of that, the rolling out of that principle on councils like us.
I think I would agree with you on that final point.
That's our objective.
Maybe Graham could tell me what he thinks the actual level of what the actual percentage should be to avoid us having a cut.
Considerably higher than 4%, I'm afraid. However, the context to this is really important. There was a first consultation about the broad principles that went to all local authorities, and there was an overwhelming 90 odd, 98 plus maybe more, in favour of the principles, and the principles included things like transparency and funding to be fair and funding to be grants and funding to be council tax and what have you. We might have been the only authority to disagree, which was with principles that were really hard to disagree with. So we said, no, we don't support fairer funding because we think it's going to mean this. No, we don't support transparency because we think it means this. So we kind of had to put ourselves into quite an unusually contentious and provocative position to challenge what everyone would logically say. Why wouldn't you support fair funding? Why wouldn't you support transparency? And all of that. So we also know it's a very, very clear government objective to look at redistribution, and it has been talked into existence over the last probably 7 or 8 years, maybe a little bit longer, that no longer do we just look at government grant. Back in the days before, it was always, what percentage is your government grant going up or down? And that was the only strap line, the only figure, or it might be looking into other types of grants as well. That might be the complication, new grants and what have you. But never before has it actually been calculated on taking council tax into the calculation in exactly the same way as a government grant. So that the whole impetus, the objective, the momentum is indisputably towards redistribution. Under these proposals, we were going to get close to 0% increase in CSP. I think probably it's about 2% if you add all 3 years together. Some councils were getting 0, bang on 0. Some were actually getting a slight minus. So to come back at that, it has to have some degree of credibility in the eyes of the recipient. So I didn't feel we could, as Stephen has pointed out as well, just say, no, we're against redistribution. That can't possibly happen because it's going to happen. Well, what we can do is fight for the best outcome we realistically could achieve. And well, at the time, CSP was running at closer to 2%. It's obviously a lot higher now. And to add another 2% or 1.5%, 2% because of the tier 1 responsibilities of adult social care and children's, I thought was a defendable, strong rationale. So I'm sure we could have come up with a higher figure than 4, but then it's also given a position to the government to be able to defend, or let's say for us to say, surely you can afford 4%. That's the other part of the argument. So we say our council tax goes up by 4.99%. As Stephen rightly points out, that's not the whole part of the CSP. It was a large part of our CSP. We have new homes, which equals very roughly another 1%. So we're into 6% there. We have business rates increase through new businesses, and the business rates multiplier goes up. So we're saying, look, we can point to, and of course the government will be putting additional funding in as well. Surely you can afford 4%. So it was trying to craft as compelling a narrative, something like this is so convincing it's hard for you to ignore argument through the lens of we surely have more than those costs in terms of real terms increased, and surely you can afford it, being as council tax goes up 5.99 plus business rates. And that was the logic behind it.
So what percentage do you think would allow us to break even, for want of a better word? And also as a side point, I must say that always, I'm glad the people ask questions in consultations to get the answer they want. And I'm glad you weren't stupid enough to not realise that, so well done.
Yeah, I'm just doing a quick calculation. I think I think 6%, maybe just under.
Yes, I think generally speaking, anything called fairer funding, you stop worrying.
A bit like the inflation, Stephen.
Well, yeah.
Sorry. Oops. Adrian.
I'm struggling to understand these numbers. The number on the previous slide is 47 million, and none of the numbers there is 47 million. So how does the 47 million become 13.9, 23.6 and 32.2?
Okay.
The 47 million is the calculate if you add each of the years, so it's the total loss in council tax over the 3 years. So you have to count each of the 3 years. So the best way of explaining it is if you look at the final year where we lose an additional £21 million by 28-29, which is it was going to be 11 million. We now have a shortfall of 32, gives us a £21 million additional loss. Yes. If that came in year one, you'd have 3 lots of 21 million that you lose, which gives you 63 million. However, 21 million problem doesn't kick in year one. It's phased over 3 years, and therefore it's not 21 times 3 equals 63. It's a more complex calculation whereby you have a smaller figure in year 2 and an even smaller figure in year 1.
So getting back to the numbers again, that 47 million is an additional cut to the initial estimate.
The 47 million is, by losing the 47 million over 3 years, it has the effect of, from the last position we reported to ONS when we set the budget, it has the effect of increasing the challenge of year 1 from 7.8 to 13.9. It has the effect also of increasing the challenge in 27-28 from 9.2 to 23.6, and then it also has the effect of increasing the challenge in 28-29 from 11.1 to 32.2. That is the representation of the lost 47 million.
Yeah, I've got the logic now. So the 47 is the total, but over 3 years it ramps up. Now, for the lay people in the room, including me, what I want you, Graham, probably to explain is really the difference. These numbers look big, but they're not capital, they're on the revenue side, right? So this means every single year, we are going to be significantly short of millions and millions of pounds. So perhaps for the lay people, you could explain that these are not capital numbers, but revenue numbers.
Yes, so the importance in terms of explaining this, so revenue is paid for substantially or almost totally by council tax and government grant, and it represents ongoing expenditure. If you look at 28-29, which by that time we have an extra £21 million in total to find, our whole of our waste collection and disposal service is 10 or 11 million pounds. So it's 2 councils' waste collection and disposal services. It's very, very significant.
If I can get back to you, Stephen, on your explanation, which was helpful, thank you, of the impact of going for the maximum allowable increase of 4.99% over 3 years, plus an increase related to the local plan and the developments. And all of that money, which would be very, very significant, would not cover, or be very close to not covering, the loss in the revenue account because of these this redistribution. That what we're talking about there is essentially saying thousands and thousands of residents will be paying council tax, but there will be no money at all for their services.
What it means essentially is that an enormous gap is created in our revenue funding by the loss of this government grant, the 47 million over 3 years. To fill that gap, we need almost all of the council tax increase we raise. So instead of that council tax increase going into supporting services, the growth in demand for services, the inflationary impact of services, instead it has to go into trying to fill this gap. We'll be left with a very small amount, which will nowhere near cover the demands created by inflation and increasing need for services generated by our residents. So it puts us in a financially really challenging situation, more challenging than council has ever faced, I think we can say, with absolute confidence.
So the pressure on delivering services to our residents is going to be truly enormous because of this.
In a word, yes. Obviously, every bit of mitigation we can get, every bit of moderation we can secure will slightly lessen the challenge, which is why we're putting in so much effort to doing this. We're not going to kind of roll over and say, okay, that's going to happen. We're going to just do it. We're trying our very best, our level best, to mitigate this, to moderate the government's approach. Our 4% floor argument is gaining a bit of traction with other councils. It's even getting some support from councils that are set to be gainers by this process. But you know, there are lots of other ways in which this could be mitigated. And in the long run, I don't really much care what the ways are that secure a mitigation, as long as we get some form of mitigation. We'll keep pushing hard, but we're quite happy to work with other councils on other proposals that might benefit Wokingham. Our aim is to try and minimise the damaging impact this will inflict. But we have to be mindful and recognise it will have a damaging impact.
Thank you.
Pauline.
Thank you. I think I know the answer to this, but just for the record, I'll ask you anyway. Firstly, if, for instance, the government removed the cap on council tax increases, if we increase council tax by more than 4.9%, would they just snaffle it? First question. Second question is, if we increase council tax by less than 4.9%, like for instance 0, would we then have to give less back? And the final question is, if you've got 4%, what does that 47 become?
Thank you, Pauline. I'll start with the first, I'll go in order and see if I can do the calculation while I'm talking. Right, so I strongly believe that if we have the ability to charge above the cap, then we will be able to keep the benefit, because some authorities, in fact, we know at least one in Berkshire, have raised above the cap and would want to do so again with exceptional financial permissions. And of course, there is the ability to go to referendum and get agreement that way. Not that that's very attainable. I strongly believe, because of that, I strongly believe it must be true that the authority keeps the benefit of that additionality, but I believe that will hold for the term of the settlement being 3 years. And I think there's a danger after 3 years that could be brought into the redistribution calculation, assuming this is the government's objective of the day to continue doing that. So I think it must result in additional income because it makes no sense. So if if you're an authority who's in 114 or close to, you get permission to increase your council tax, and they say, well, that's now going to be redistributed. That would be crazy. So I can't believe that would happen. But I do believe the right to redistribute, just as it has been talked about in the context of business rates. So the new business rates, and then we retain our right to redistribute at the end of the settlement, gives you a 3-year window of protection. So that's on if you charge more. If you charge less, it will not help at all. It will only hinder, because in the government's calculation, there is an assumption that you charge at the 4.99%, and if you don't, it's on you. Now, so can you just say the last? Did you say if we go at 4%, how much more?
I said if you go for 4%, how much would the gap be?
I reckon if we got 4% in each of 3 years, it will be close to an extra £15 million, and therefore that gap reduces by 15 million. The ONS report has updated that 32 to 26, 25, 26, so to reduce it to 10, which becomes massively more achievable than the current proposals.
It is worth adding that we have made very substantial savings over the last 3 years, very substantial. And of course, the more time goes on, the more savings you make, the more difficult savings get to make. So a notion of low-hanging fruit, that's gone. I think this is the moment for me to bring out my analogy. We're at the kind of stage of the giraffe on the cherry picker, trying to reach the very top branches and still not getting there. It is really tough. Every round makes it more difficult because we have squeezed out everything we can. There's no fat to trim, so it gets more and more difficult each time. So I think to come in below the council tax cap, while it may sound attractive to some people, it would just make our challenges even greater.
So that was the second answer. Was the answer I expected? If you cut council tax, then you won't get any of the benefit. They'll still assume you've got the full amount. I was quite surprised by your answer to the first one, because I actually thought it was likely that if you charge more, they'd take that as well. So I know you believe that you might get to keep any upside. I'm not suggesting, but for a minute, that we increase council tax by more than 4.99%, but I would be more cautious about whether we got any of that.
I think you must keep the upside, otherwise it makes no sense for authorities that get permissions granted under 114 to raise extra money, then have to give it away. And I guess while I got the mic, just to say, when I said an extra 15 million, that is obviously off the top of my head a very rough calculation. It might be a bit toppy, it could be about 13 million, but it's that sort of ballpark. It is a game changer if we get it.
Yeah, I would just say that assuming that the government's got any common sense is probably a bit of a stretch, given that they're taking more money off us than it says we need to provide our services, even with inflation. So I wouldn't bank on them having common sense.
On this question about going above the cap, we're not in 114 measures, we're not in special emergency funding measures, so we wouldn't have any automatic right to do that. We'd have to go down the referendum route. I don't believe there's any experience of a referendum on such a subject ever being won. So even if there were an appetite to do it, and I don't think there is, even if there were an appetite to do it, the outcome would be almost certainly a thumbs down from the voters. So
it would just cost you a lot of money and you'd be back where you started.
It would cost you money to get a result that you know in your heart of hearts is coming anyway. So I fear it would be a waste of resource.
So just to restate, I'm not suggesting that we increase council tax by more than 4.99%, or indeed any particular figure.
Nor am I. But
I'm
think,
asking the question about what the
yeah,
implications are.
But the implications, I think, as Graham said, would be we would be able to retain it. So if the government decided to increase the size of the cap, push the cap higher, there's no indication whatsoever that that's their intention. But were they to do that, I think we would be able to retain that money, at least for the period of this 3-year financial settlement.
Final question, actually. The government keep claiming that they're increasing the amount of money being given to councils. So what are they actually increasing it by, Graham? I'm sure it's not inflation.
The difficulty with that comment that's publicised is the council tax increase and business rates increase is included in that calculation. I think the increase for next year, and I'm not 100% sure, but I remember it being in the region of about 1.1 billion as additional money from last year.
What percentage is that?
I think that, the whole pot is in excess of 70 billion. I don't know how much all the component parts are.
So it's probably 1.5%, roughly.
I wouldn't like to say in a public meeting, because I'm just trying to give you a sense that the whole pot is massive, 70 billion plus. And in that pot is the council tax revenue, the business rates revenue, and government grants. So some of the, and of course, council tax is assumed to go up by 4.99% for every tier 1 local authority. So there is an awful lot of additionality created. So the strap lines are maybe a little bit deceiving if you're thinking about government grants.
It is fair to say as well that this has been the way the government since, well, I can't remember exactly when, but the previous government brought in this concept of core spending power, which included council tax. So when they say they've increased in the amount of spending power of councils, it's a strange way of looking at it, because it's basically saying we're giving you the chance to raise more council tax.
So, but last year the difference is the government did actually give us more money, whilst this year it sounds like they're taking it off us. If they're increasing the total pot that they're providing by 1.1 billion, and the total pot is 70, I make that roughly 1.5%. But I think what you're saying is the 70 includes more than just what the government's putting in. So it's a bit difficult to work out.
Oh, a large part of that, yeah. A substantial element is council tax and business rates.
I think Dave is next.
So firstly, I am very against these changes, because obviously I think they're grossly unfair to working residents. I think working residents pay their council tax in the hopes that it's going to be spent on their own local services, and to say that it's going to be spent on someone else's local services seems fundamentally unjust to me. However, none of us are in control of this, in the sense that this is coming around, and whatever happens, we are going to have to run a council based on the money that we have available at the time. If I was looking at it from a business perspective and someone asked me my advice and they said, you know, we're losing a huge revenue stream, what's going to happen, you know, what should we do? I'd say we need to plan very quickly and come up with where we're going to cut, how we're going to cut. And I accept that, you know, we might have no choice but to cut some services at some level. We may have to cut staff, we may have to cut, all those sort of things could happen, but we need to balance the books, and at the end of the day, provide the best possible service we can with the money we have for the residents that we represent. And I just want to know how far we've got with that disaster strategy.
Yeah, Dave, obviously next week we have Community and Corporate, which will have a first look at the overall budget. It's just really headline stuff, the gap between where we thought we'd be and we may well be if these proposals come in their full force. And we will be inviting comments from the committee about how they think we might strategically approach this challenge. So we'll be very much listening to and welcoming your ideas.
Mark has something.
Just to add to that, Dave, I think when you see the CCOS agenda pack, which has been published, and then you see at the meeting itself, in talking democratic services and the leading with Graham, we're going to make some changes to the forward plan of what we're looking at to make sure there's sufficient time, a lot of sufficient time. So there are a couple of items on agendas that we're all expecting to see over the next 2 to 3 months. Some of those will get pushed to make sure we have ample time for every single directorate's budget to be scrutinised and all of those conversations. But if you look at the agenda pack that's been published for next week, there's a lot of high-level information in there already that show kind of where we're going. And then next week we'll start going into all the detail of that.
Yeah, I'm very conscious that if we're slow in reacting, we'll be relying on our reserves, and I don't want to be in a position where our reserves are dwindling, and where they shouldn't be.
Before Susan comes in, I think in the way that we've been planning out these sessions the next couple of months, and some of the work that we've seen and some of the work I've seen on the agenda pack just for next week alone, as chair of CCOS, I think I can see there is a hell of a lot of work that's gone into it already, more to come, more input from us, but be assured from what I've seen and from the agenda pack, which is on mod.gov now, there's a hell of a lot of plan for the worst, hope for the best, work already underway.
Yep, thank you very much. I think that for me, the important thing is when we think about looking forward is that we plan, that we don't have knee-jerk reactions, because when we think about reserves, they are also there for a reason, and that it's really important that also we think about invest to save. So, because sometimes when we knee-jerk, there can be unintended consequences, and that's for residents as well. We need to think about the cumulative impact of proposals, that kind of thing. So, for me, it's really thinking about what we're doing and not knee-jerking. Actually, take forward what's worked in the past, and for us as a council, because we have done well in terms of savings, in terms of our history. So we take forward what's worked. We do the demand management stuff. We do take out unnecessary processes. We do act as early as possible. So do more and more of that. So do more of the the care home stuff, the specialist accommodation. So it's really doing that so that we're not having an impact on that discretionary service, because it's the discretionary service which is really important to our residents. So it is not knee-jerk for me.
I totally accept there's a balance between knee-jerk versus too fast and too slow. Both could be the wrong thing, but I think we just need to make sure that we're on it.
Well, I agree we need to make sure we're on it. I also agree with Susan that we need to think through this strategically. We've got 3 years' worth of significant savings to find, so we really do need to have a plan. Also, what hampers us at the moment is we don't quite know what the target is we're working to, because it could change. It could get worse, for goodness sake, but it could get better. So, I don't want to start identifying one service area we want to suddenly cut and then discover we don't need to do it. We may have our thoughts, but we've got to plan really carefully here. The timetable for knowing more is in the fair funding proposals bit on page 16. We will start to get more clarity on the impact of this during later in the autumn.
Sorry, can I?
As we get that, it'll become more possible, I think, to plan in detail.
Sorry, just quickly, because I need to correct the timetable here, which shows you this is very fluid. It's okay, if you have reserves, it's okay to use reserves as long as you have and developing a plan for when it buys you time to get to a new steady state. So we are in a relatively good position. Those 114 authorities have no reserves, no time to do the things that Stephen and Susan were talking about. We're in a better position, but you're absolutely right, Dave, you can't just use reserves and hope the problem's going to go away. There's going to be a magic solution, and obviously that's not what we're talking about. So it buys you time to make good choices, good decisions, which avoids those unintended consequences. Just moving to the timeline, and this is fluid. At the time I produced this slide, page 16, these things were true at that time. However, the response to the consultation won't be coming out at the end of October. It will now be coming out early November. I would take that as anywhere from the 1st to the 16th. And the funding allocations will not be coming out at the end of November now. They'll be coming out just before Christmas. And what I will be doing is updating, if we can make sense of what comes out in November, I will be updating the corporate and community overview and scrutiny in December as soon as I can understand what the numbers mean and the impact. So just going to Stephen's point is uncharted, unknown, and we'll obviously be keeping the committee abreast of significant developments, and at the same time behind the scenes trying to come up with ways to plot our way out of it. And ultimately, Dave, will have to set a balanced budget in February Council.
Yeah, Adrian.
I look at this and I think our residents pay their taxes, they pay their national insurance, they pay their business rates, they pay their employers' national insurance, and they stick all this money into a black hole. And by 2028, 29, what we're saying is the equivalent of 20 million a year from council tax will be going also into a black hole. We won't know where it goes. It'll get redistributed somewhere around the UK. I think that is a degradation of voting, of democracy, because, you know, people would say, you know, when you knock on their doors, you know, we pay our council tax for local services, as Dave said. And what we will be saying in the future is some of your council tax is going into a treasury black hole and gets redistributed, we don't know where. So I think that's a very disturbing thing.
Yeah, I think that is the effect, you might say. The reality is, as I've said, we'd need the council tax to plug the gap created by the loss of our government grants. So the council tax in that sense still stays here, but instead of being able to support the growth in demand for services, inflationary impact and its effect on services, it has to go into filling the gap created by the loss of government support. So you're right that that's the effect, but that's not quite the reality. And I think it's worth just making that point, just for the sake of completeness and fairness.
What I was informed on the sort of grapevine concerning the other council in Berkshire that was mentioned was essentially they went to central government and said, we have absolutely no chance of creating a balanced budget with this amount of revenue and this amount of expenditure. At some point, you know, the 14 million goes to, 4 odd million becomes 14, becomes 20 per year. If it continues, if that redistribution continues into future years, it will presumably be more than 20 million. And at some point, Graham is going to have to say, there really is no chance of balancing the budget.
Well, I think the important thing to say, first of all, is that the council we're alluding to is the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead. And the Royal Borough suffered from exactly the subject we discussed earlier on. For several years, they did not raise council tax. And I'm afraid the result was they used reserves to subsidise the delivery of services. The inevitable result was, sooner or later, the reserves cupboard was bare. And that's their problem. They can't set a balanced budget because they don't have the income, they have the demand, and they don't have the reserves. We are not in that position, and I don't anticipate our getting into that position. And it is really important to stress that this is a 3-year financial settlement. We don't know what will happen at the end of it. If this is the period of adjustment and redistribution, we shouldn't assume that everything will be dire after 28, 29. It may get better, who knows? But the point I'm trying to make is that we are in no imminent danger of 114 measures. Obviously, we're now under greater financial pressure than ever before. And we are going to have to make some really tough decisions to keep our heads above water. We are going to have to do a lot of things we wouldn't want to do. We are going to have to look for additional sources of income, savings that are unpalatable to all of us, we're going to have to consider. So it's important to kind of strike the right balance here. This is an enormous challenge, but Wokingham has some advantages that will see us through it. We've got some usable reserves, which we can deploy. We've got an excellent team in our finance department and across the organisation. We've got excellent officers. We've focused on prevention, early intervention and invest to save measures. And I'm very loath to see any of those sacrificed because they save us money in the long term. And we must keep focus on prevention and trying to reduce longer term demand. We have some excellent councillors with excellent ideas about how to do things. We are a good organisation and we will come through this. We also have really good partners in the community, and the partnership working we've really accentuated in the last few years. We're going to need to accentuate even more in the future because partnership working with others, whether it's other councils, business, voluntary and charitable sector, is going to become even more important than it has been. So there are ways we'll get through this, but I can't pretend this isn't going to be really tough.
Brian.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's worth explaining clearly the mechanics of this and how it's being proposed to work. So that the government will look at a calculation of what they think our needs are. Then they'll look at a calculation of what our council tax income is, and they say your council tax income is higher than your level of need. And now we need to go and address that. Now they don't address that by sending us a bill for our council tax. They address it by reducing other ongoing grants in the CSP. Now the really interesting point there as well is depends what's rolled in to the CSP government grant calculation will depend on whether year 3 is actually a minus figure or not. If it's actually a minus figure, because obviously the more grants you roll in, you create the headroom to reduce, and it hasn't been determined exactly what grants roll in, but clearly if they're less than 21 million rolled in for us, then year 3 we actually have a minus figure against our grant, which then moves into negative RSG, we talked, and that has a much clearer effect. If it's a minus figure there, then that does mean that's a bill on our council tax as opposed to a reduced grant within. So it would be interesting to see how that plays out in year 3. When we move to, obviously I hope I don't get to C and 4% comes in and it all looks marvellous. But I have seen calculations where we have a minus figure, depends the assumptions, what's rolled in and what isn't. Year 4, by year 4, I go to Stephen's point, our baseline would have been addressed back to the point it's perceived to be. So year 4, from that baseline, would be a normal settlement, which on average would be in the region of 5, 6, 7% would be a normal settlement, but it would be on that new calibrated baseline that we've stepped down to. If we're running the organisation soundly in year 3 based on that new baseline, obviously with considerable pain, then we move up from that baseline, say 6% average per annum, a normal settlement.
Andrew, sorry you had to wait so long.
Yeah, thank you. I think Graham clarified some of the things I was going to say. I think one of the points I was going to make, and it was said by particularly Dave and Adrian, was the idea that people's council tax money will be redistributed, which I think, if I'm understanding Graham correctly, is not the case, and I think it's important that that is understood clearly, unless it goes into the. I know you mentioned potential, but if I'm right in understanding, that's not necessarily the forecast at the moment. That is that a kind of very worst case scenario with that.
First of all, absolutely correct. It's not the council tax that's being picked up and redistributed, but it's by looking at the calculated need and the income, council tax income. The calculation is you have too much money, now we need to reduce your government grants within the CSP. And whilst there's sufficient in quantum, then that can be chipped away at by reducing the government grant. Has the same effect, of course, but you're right, the council tax is kept by the local authority. Year 3 is in the £47 million calculation we talk about. So it's not about best or worst case, it's about the assumptions of which grants will be, how many grants will be rolled in. So for example, obviously if you only had an assumption of 15 million core government grants worth being rolled in and 21 million has to be found, reduced, then you move into a minus number. But of course, if you roll in £30 million worth, then you can still do that without moving to a minus number. So it will depend on the decision around what grants are rolled in.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. I just wanted to clarify. I think just the ways we were talking about a bit, just to make sure it's clear. I mean, I'll put on the record I'm very supportive of the pushing for the 4% floor and things like that, and I do think that obviously would be in everyone's interest. But I think wanted to clarify those points so that it's not misleading, particularly residents, if we're talking to them in that way.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm grateful for that support for the 4% floor. That's very welcome. I hope I explained before Graham explained much more effectively how I understood this process. And it is not, at this stage at least, literally a redistribution of council tax. Obviously, it is fair to say the council tax that's raised, which most people will assume is going towards paying for services and improving services and meeting extra demand, it's not going to be possible for most of that to be used in that way. It's plugging a gap created by the loss of government support.
Pauline.
Two questions. Firstly, have the government told you what's going to happen in year 4, although they may not be in power by then? And secondly, there's two halves to this equation. There's the demand side and the supply side. What efforts have we made to make sure the government understand that our costs are more extensive than they believe, because they obviously believe we don't need this money, but we're managing to spend it. So either they're right and we're wasting it, or they're wrong, and I believe the latter, by the way.
They're wrong.
And they've got their understanding of our costs wrong.
They have. It's flawed. It's horribly flawed, and it completely underestimates our cost in certain vital areas. It's based on some figures that relate to pre-pandemic. It is flawed. The algorithm is flawed. I hoped under the previous government we realised that doing things by algorithm has its problems. Unfortunately, the love of algorithms continues to generate all sorts of decisions that are flawed. It makes sense to use calculations as some kind of guide to how you may want to distribute your money, but to use it as a kind of iron model for redistribution is very, very, in my view, wrong.
Yeah, I remember a huge argument when Theresa May was Prime Minister about whether the Conservative government should be changing the algorithms or not, and there was a very large argument in the House of Commons about that. At least we've got a bit of warning. If this was a commercial company facing a complete liquidation of revenue because of, say, COVID, of which I've got direct experience, you get no notice at all. Now, what I would do in a commercial company facing this is immediately clamp anything that I could clamp down. I know that we're obviously trying to save money anyway, so I'm not suggesting you're sitting on your hands waiting for next year. But if we did do that, would that negatively impact the government's view of what we need for next year?
Well, some of our effort is to persuade the government, if it goes ahead with its proposals in their current form without mitigations, it will end up having to spend a lot of money bailing out councils that go into financial difficulties because of the spending cuts the government have imposed. And it seems to me foolhardy to try and proceed with proposals which I think there's abundant evidence will put a lot of councils into financial jeopardy. I think we, as Graham said earlier, relatively speaking, are in a strong place. But there are many, many, many other councils that will fall over if the government proceeds with this. And that in itself, I hope, will persuade them that they really do need to moderate the approach.
That wasn't the question. The question was...
That's my answer.
I know it's your answer. I'll ask Graham. You heard the question, didn't you, Graham? The question, let me repeat the question. So if you were a commercial company facing zero revenue, which is really what you were facing into a certain, or at least very, very low revenue, you'd immediately clamp everything down as hard as you could to try and get yourself the maximum forward advantage before it hits you. The question is, does that, if we did something like that, would it impact the position the government thought of this year and therefore make our position worse?
Oh, yes. Okay. So I'll start with the former bit is we have the benefit of not having to stick all the thumb screws and everything on right now. Of course, we need to be very mindful of every pound we spend. But when I'm also conscious if one enacts 114-like measures, because we're not, but 114-like measures, it can suffocate and stifle the organisation and prevent innovation, great new ways of creating things, which is both more effective and more cost-effective as well. So it's finding, again, that balance, and because we're not on the cusp of financial peril, we have the ability to do that. So I wouldn't for 1 minute want you to think that we are carefree with our spending. We contain our expenditure really well, did last year, doing a pretty good job this year when you compare with even nearby authorities. And to put in some of the more draconian measures, I think, is an awful lot of time and achieves an awful lot of as disbenefits that we would rather avoid if we could. Whether the government, as to the point, if we if we came up with all the solutions, would the government be looking and going, oh, well, you're fine, so we're not interested in your pleas? In the context of a local government finance settlement that impacts on every local authority across the country, I don't think it would make one jot of difference. However, if we did magically come up with all the solutions, it would be difficult to do that and then say we're going to face really perilous times unless you give us a more reasonable and fairer funding settlement and use as a guide as opposed to a truth. So does that answer your question or not?
Sort of. I was thinking more structural than just mood. So if we managed to cut expenditure this year to come in more under budget than above budget or whatever, you know, I mean, normally you're very good and you come in pretty much on budget. If you managed by some means to come in significantly below budget because you preempted your activities that you're going to have to do next year anyway because you're going to have to save this money, would the government then loop round and say, oh, well, you didn't spend it all this year, therefore you're getting even less next year?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they would be monitoring each local authority in that way. And of course, behind an underspend, there's all sorts of different reasons, explanations, and what have you. So it would be, it wouldn't be a reasonable thing, I think.
And maybe if I can come in on that as well, that we're not commercial, as in we have approaches in terms of we're increasing our commercialisation, and we have the officer who particularly is driving that forward, and a lot of our budget is spent on people services, children's and adults. So you turn the thumbscrews on really on children's and adults when we're talking about that. So whatever we do, we've really got to put a lot of thought behind. I'm a massive believer in innovation and enabling officers to innovate. Yes, we've absolutely got to look at efficiencies, of course we do. We've got to look at demand management. But I think the more space that we give ourselves to actually be creative, the less negative impacts there will be. Notwithstanding that, there will still be difficult decisions, as Stephen has actually said. And I think sort of going back to, I know we were talking about the calculation of needs earlier on, and the government's calculation of needs. I think it's interesting because London councils have lobbied so that they believe that the cost of housing should be incorporated into that need, which is not currently incorporated. So I don't know if the government's listening to that, and if that were to change, that might have an impact, positive impact in this area due to the higher housing costs in this area as well. So it's, there are lots of moving parts in this whole sphere.
And just another final point for me, well, maybe it won't be final, depends on whether Pauline wants to ask another question, but it is important to say that the prevention and early intervention would be an easy target to go for, in the sense that you can't see the immediate benefits, but it would be very foolish to go for, because that has the capacity to save us a lot of money downstream. So you really do need to be careful and mindful of the consequences rather than rush into things that you think will make things better. And I have some sympathy with your point, as you can see. Graham doesn't believe the government's that interested in what we do, and he's probably right. Well, he nearly always is. In fact, he probably always is. But it has worried me occasionally. Here we are, shortlisted for Council of the Year, rated by IMPOW as the 5th most efficient council in the country. Will that be used against us rather than in our favour? But I think it should be used in our favour. We've done all this, and yet what you're doing is going to really put our work in jeopardy as well.
I think evidence suggests it'll be held against you. Final question, I don't expect an answer tonight, but maybe next week when we go through the figures, having read the agenda. It would be interesting to see what your forecast for the reserves is, and where they bottom out before they start going back up again, maybe, or at least stop going down. I don't expect an answer now because I know that's a bigger question.
I know you don't expect an answer now, but that the reason why we produced the reserves paper is to show how many different types of reserves, and they're held for different reasons. So I couldn't I can only answer that question against each particular reserve. Yes, there will be there is a total, but I can only answer that question and give it justice by taking each reserve on its own merit.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think what's missing from that paper, which will be interesting, is not just next year, but where you think it's going to go in future. So you talk about last year, you talk about this year, or the year in future, in this paper. Last year you talked about that year and this year, but you never talk about 3 or 4 years down the road. And it'd be interesting, and I'm not asking for an answer now, to understand where it's going to go in the next 3 years before we get out of this horrible government.
The future 3 years is stated in the MTFP under the reserve section. It's got 3-year forecast. Not in the paper tomorrow.
Carolina had a question.
Thank you. Mine's mostly on the devolution. Thank you. Thank you. It was just interesting having read this, and it's been going on some time. So is there any costs involved to Wokingham? And do we have any timescales about when these things are going to happen? Also, if we can't agree on a partnership, will the government then come in and say, you are partnering with Oxford, Swindon or Maidenhead? Thank you.
Sorry. First of all, thank you for the question, Caroline. On your first point about, I've forgotten what your first point was. Costs, yes. We established the Berkshire Prosperity Board last year because the government was effectively winding up LEPs, locally enterprise partnerships, and transferring their functions to councils. We inherited the reserves of the local LEP, and those reserves, the interest on those reserves are covering all of the costs of the work we've been doing. So you'll notice there's a new appointment of a programme director to help guide us through the process for Berkshire, the Berkshire councils. That is paid for entirely out of a portion of the reserves interest. Not the reserves themselves, but the interest on the reserves. So we have inherited a substantial amount of LEP money, which is helping us through this without any significant costs falling on any of the constituent councils. Your second point was timescales. Obviously, it would be desirable to reach agreement on a footprint and which councils are involved and which councils are not involved. We're hoping to be able to do that, but realistically, there remain quite a few issues to resolve. I think you are right that sooner or later the government will have a view as to what it thinks the Thames Valley Mayoral Strategic Authority should look like. And it'd be good if we could get to a point where we preempt that and present our own proposal. But we can submit an expression of interest in a fairly general sense that there is an appetite in the Thames Valley to have a mayoral strategic authority. And that is something we will be working towards. As I said, this would be the second time we submitted an expression of interest. We've submitted one under the previous government for a Berkshire mayoral strategic authority. That wasn't rejected, but they said they'd be happy to talk to us if we included a mayor. And at that stage, we didn't want to include a mayor. Now we realise that's the only show on the road. There isn't any alternative. And we do need to keep remembering the potential for levering in significant amounts of money. So one thing I think there is universal agreement on, I think both within this council and with all the councils we've been talking, is affordable housing is a real problem in this area. It's a potential constraint on future economic development, the lack of genuinely affordable housing. And the only way, realistically, we're going to get significant amounts of Homes England funding to subsidise the delivery of affordable housing is through a mayoral strategic authority. We can lever in some ourselves, and we are trying to do so. Berkshire will be able to lever in some. But a mayoral strategic authority is where the money is going. The government are using the mayors as a conduit for delivering substantial amounts of funding for infrastructure, including affordable housing.
Andrew.
I was just going to change subject again. I want to ask something about the local plan, if that's okay. It was mentioned on there about in the the letter that came from the inspectors. I think was it March or April time, and the response with that. Lots of the concerns initially were about sort of infrastructure delivery and delivery of housing on schedule and things like that. And I know this was the kind of monitoring of this delivery came up as a sort of concern at one of the Loddon Valley Garden Village sort of consultation, sort of public consultation things about actually will it come up on time, and you know how do we know it? I just wondered whether there are general ways in which the council is looking at kind of improving the way that they monitor the delivery of the infrastructure, and whether things like parish councils and things like that might be able to be brought on board more with that, because my feeling is that parish councils often have a sort of wealth of knowledge, and often I may be wrong, but you know some of the councillors are there for maybe a longer time than borough councillors are sometimes, and therefore see their areas change much more, and could be valued voices on those kind of developments and see those through, particularly if their development's going through for 15 years and things like that. So I was just wondering whether that could be something that be thought of either as working parties or subcommittees or something to involve people at all levels, really.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Yeah, first of all, those questions that were submitted were of the kind that we anticipated, and you would expect in any local plan examination that those kind of questions about deliverability would come up, and the pace of delivery. Will you be able to deliver everything within the planned period? I think we were able to give good answers, as good answers as the inspectors were expecting, and they haven't come back to us with further questions on that. So I think we believe they are satisfied with their initial answers. But on your main point about bringing in town and parishes, or parishes in this case, yes. In fact, I think some work is already underway on that. I had an approach from Shinfield Parish Council, acting on behalf, I think, of Shinfield, Barkham and Arborfield, about working together with the Borough Council to try and ensure that we got the best possible development we could, particularly at Loddon Garden Village, or Hall Farm, as it's popularly known. So we are in constructive dialogue. We're just trying to find a date. Unfortunately, the date they suggested is during our colleague conference, when virtually all of our officers are going to be engaged. So we're trying to come up with another date, but we are keen to do this. I'm keen to do it. In fact, way back in September, when I presented the local plan to the council, I said I hoped we could get to a position where those who very understandably were objecting to the local plan could work with us to try and make it as good as we could get it. And I think there is an opportunity now to get to that point, and I'm very keen that we take it.
Okay, let's move on to agenda item 31. Before you introduce it, I don't know whether it's the officers or Stephen who's going to introduce it. I just wanted to say a bit about what our role is in this meeting. Is that all right? If I, purpose of the report, and well, before you get on to the...
Please do. Yes. Right. You are, after all, the chair.
Okay. Well, it does come before the executive summary in the agenda. So, so the purpose of this policy is to consider the advertising content displayed on local authority assets to best align it with community values, legal standards and public interest whilst allowing the council to benefit from associated commercial income. And those assets, I mean, I'm sure you'll say a bit about what those assets are, but it's very specifically about advertising on those particular assets. And secondly, the recommendation. What we're being asked to do is note and comment on the revised draft policy. So look to see whether what has happened to our recommendations from last time, whether they've been included or not, and if not, why not? And in the light of the latest information on future funding changes, which we've just spent an hour discussing, recommend where we feel the balance should be drawn between adding constraints beyond national guidelines. So we will be using the national guidelines at the very least, and reducing the council's ability to raise advertising income, because as the preceding presentation has shown, we really do need to raise income. So over to you.
Well, I'm just going to say a very few words, and then I'm going to hand over to Graham and Gemma. Those few words, you've largely spoken yourself, so you've kind of stolen my thunder. I'm very interested to see the committee's view on the balance we might strike between these competing demands. Obviously, we want to ensure that the public health aspects and Marmot obligations are reflected in the way we behave as a council. But we're also at the same time, as we've heard at great length in the previous item, under enormous financial pressure. So I'd be very interested in the committee's views on how the executive may want to try and strike that balance. And I hope, again, as you've already said, Catherine, that the committee will focus on whether it believes the new version of the report incorporates all the points you made back in your previous look at this in June. And if it doesn't, then I hope you'll tell us what we've missed. But I'm hoping you won't try and add new things in, because we really don't want to have to redraft the report again. We would like to move forward with this as soon as we can.
Thank you. So, without reiterating the same points, we made some updates from your comments at the June committee. We've included the matrix that you asked, which was our decisions, and we've added a couple of different areas. I think the question in the context of the previous discussion is what we've added in now, and those restrictions we believe will cost probably about £40,000 a year in lost income. And as Stephen said, I think what we're after is your view on the balance between that lost income and whether those restrictions would be right, and we will then finalise a report to take to October executive.
Okay, has anyone got any comments they want to make? Start the conversation up. Pauline.
Thank you. Thank you for doing the table and making the report clearer. It really does help. I think an observation on the table is I think you've misunderstood fast fashion, in that fast fashion is all about fashion that is only worn once, rather than cheap fashion, which is something slightly different. So I think the table has misunderstood that a bit. I also worry that the amount of work required to actually implement this policy might be underestimated. So I'd be interested in understanding that. And I do recognise that that we are really desperately in need of extra revenue. So my personal opinion is we should stick to the legislation and forget about everything else.
I totally agree with that. I don't think we should be losing £40,000 a year unnecessarily.
Graham?
Can I just respond to the point about the complexity?
I'm sorry.
It will be our partners that will have the complexity of having less partners to work with. So we won't, I don't believe, see a lot of work for ourselves because our advertising partners will go out and do that work to find where it's likely to impact us is that income. And as we've said before, different authorities have had different impacts, so we can only go on the best of our information, but it will be more likely that it will be harder for them to find the partners with the restrictions, and the outcome ultimately would be lower income because they won't find those partners. But for Gemma especially, we wouldn't expect to see more work, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah, Caroline.
It's just two comments. One thing about fast fashion is the charity shops do really well out of fast fashion. The second thing is you talk about income. Is it possible to have a review in 6 months or a year's time to see how much the loss is before we make a rash decision on something that we spent a lot of time on at the last meeting trying to get a policy in front of us? So I'd like to say, could we have a full review on income and everything and how it's working in 6 months or a year's time, if that's possible? Thank you.
That's assuming that we adopt all the extra. Yeah.
That's if we assume it, because we did go through a lot of this last time, and made lots of recommendations.
I think the issue will be whether in that period of time we can really see what that impact is and could administer it, because as we just said, there will be quite a lot of work for those, our advertising partners, to find that more restricted, and we won't know what the alternative was. So I think I can understand the principle. I think it's just going to be very difficult in a 6 month, maybe even in a year period to really know and for them to implement such a change to be able to roll it back.
Thanks. Mark.
I was going to say it's one of those at some future point yet to be determined. I think the only thing you could probably commit to on coming back on it. I'm actually agreeing with Pauline and Dave that I think where we're looking at all of the items on fair funding and the changes of this, when I've talked to a number of my peers and colleagues of lots of different colour parties around the country from my own network, you know, the vast majority of peers I've spoken to are just adopting the national policy because it's fast, it's easy, it gives flexibility. I'm also thinking of one eye ahead, not just on this element of the policy, but then the next part of street signs that we're going to be, roundabouts, etc. The next phase of the policy. Forgive me, I've just completely forgotten what it's called, but you know what I mean. Thank you. I should probably have remembered that, but you know, it's quite late for a Monday. So I, when you look at this and the cumulative impact over the next 3, 4, 5 years, actually this starts to add up. And whilst, you know, no policy is going to be perfect in appealing to everyone or pleasing everybody, I think adopting the national policy, the vast majority of other councils equivalent to us around the country and this area, and I'll happily defer to any other colleagues that they've spoken to in their own areas, I would just say for now, for the financial position that we face ourselves in, for the robustness of the national policy with what we're seeing, I would back the national policy position.
Alison, sorry.
I think when we discussed this at the last meeting, I gained the understanding that what we were talking about was advertising on bus shelters and within the council website. I've only seen mention of bus shelters. And I just wondered, you know, obviously we need to maximise our income. How much effort has been put into considering other places that we could have adverts, you know, to get income from advertisers? You know, we have car parks, we have country parks, we have lots of places. I mean, I know we don't want to become over commercial, but we need the money.
So Gemma's doing some fantastic work to identify places. I think we have a whole number of roundabouts lined up. And one of the team was telling me about an arrangement for dog poo bins. that we've been able to get an advert for, linked to vets. Which kind of makes sense. So,
who would want to be advertising their products on the dog movie?
So, I just thought it was a fantastic idea of the sort of ingenuity and the invention that exactly comes to your point of we are trying to look at every opportunity within reason and within the policy to drive income and hopefully help local businesses as well. I will find in the report, it does give a little bit more detail of what's included because it's vehicles. I did see it earlier, I'll find it and I'll pop you a bit in the report that explains.
So does anyone want to go further than the national policy? Andrew?
Well, I just wanted to comment as well. I think it's, I appreciate that we're looking at sort of the immediate short-term savings with this in terms of actually what it will cost this year. I think what it's worth noting is a lot of these things are about the sort of the health of the borough as well, and these, I think we've talked a lot about this kind of invest to save and things like that. I know it's going to be really hard to put a figure on exactly if we reduce advertising on fast food and gambling, exactly how much that's going to save the borough 10 years down the line. But I don't think we can forget that aspect of it. And again, I know it's going to be hard, near impossible to measure what difference that would make, but I don't think we can ignore that. And some of the things we're looking at, particularly I'm thinking about some of these things which would be added on things. I'm looking particularly at things like the gambling, betting shops, payday loan providers. Those kind of things can be incredibly damaging to people. The less healthy food, probably more wide scale, but maybe lower impact. But further down the line, it's difficult to tell. But I would be inclined to go with the further ones.
Can you say a bit more about what's in the guideline, the national guidelines, and what isn't? I mean, I know it's a huge list, but can you, responding to Andrew?
Yes, in the report on page, at the bottom of 22 and the top of 23, lists the headings of the national guidance. There is a link in the report to the detail. It's pages and pages of detail, so it's not easy to give a summary. On page 24 your report, the table gives a very high level, these are the added bits that we've put in at this point. So at a high level on both fronts, hopefully that helps. Just in terms of what's included, point 2.2 gives a list of which assets this covers for the council. So it talks about internet, social media, vehicles, buildings and other physical assets.
I just want to pick up on that where it says gambling on page 24, that's only there to say that it doesn't include lotteries? Is that my understanding is correct?
So the national guidance is around socially responsible advertising for gambling products and gambling organisations. So what we have proposed as gambling is that we will allow our lottery to be obviously advertised for our local good causes, but the national guidance around gambling remains.
Can I clarify? Because I know gambling comes under both, so I'm thinking things like betting shops and things like that. Is that prohibited under the national guidance, or would that only be prohibited under our guidance? Would that be an additional one?
Yes. Yeah, so under the national guidance, it's around socially responsible time of advertising, type of advertising, means of advertising. Ours is to restrict the advertising.
So you could have things on betting shops and things like that if we just went with the national one. Yeah, okay.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Sorry, where are we? Pauline.
I think our time would be better spent trying to lobby the government to increase the guidelines to, because I agree with you about gambling. Actually, I don't like gambling, and I think it particularly affects and preys on people that probably don't have a lot of money in the first place. But I think bearing in mind that people are not an island, and you know, you drive into Reading, you might get different advertising from Wokingham, for example. It would be better to spend our time, or as politicians, lobbying the government to try and change the guidelines than trying to do our own thing, because we've got two officers here that actually fundamentally would be better spending their time trying to work out how we're going to meet this £50 million sledgehammer that's about to hit us, rather than wondering about whether we should be advertising package holidays, burgers, or indeed scratch cards. So I agree with you in principle, but I think the time would be better spent lobbying.
To come back to that point, yeah, I agree. We could get that on the national government list, but presumably, I don't know exactly how it works, but if the government added more restrictions and say came into line with what we wanted to do, presumably that would have the same financial effect anyway. So we're not, well, I've got some nods from over there. So, you know, if we successfully lobbied the government to say, can we have all the suggestions on our list, it would have the same financial effect.
I would doubt it, on the basis that all councils would probably be the same. So we're in a competitive market. People decide where to advertise, depending on what you can advertise. If all councils are the same, the amount of advertising revenue will be spread the same, whilst if we're more restrictive than somebody else, then we won't get the money and somebody else will, is my hypothesis.
I think just on your point on national guidance, there is some updated guidance coming in February. We think February 26, sorry, but we're not entirely sure what the complete inclusions of that will be. What we would be able to do is obviously hold to account our agencies to say we're working to national guidelines, so obviously any changes would be automatically applied to them and to our assets.
Okay, so sorry, Stephen.
That's been very interesting discussion, and I'm grateful for your having that discussion. It does highlight really the real tension between the council's objectives as a Marmot borough, public health objectives, our concerns about gambling, and as Pauline said, particularly that gambling hitting those on the lowest incomes. Those are all really important considerations. We've heard already that we've got to weigh that alongside all of these financial challenges that council faces. I think whatever the outcome that emerges from the executive, which sadly isn't just going to be able to debate it, they have to make a decision. Whatever the outcome, this point about lobbying the government on restrictions that it might want to incorporate into national legislation is something that I'm quite interested in pursuing.
Okay, so I'll put the question again. Should we vote on it? Show of hands for people who would recommend to the executives that we stick to the national guidelines and don't add anything else. I think that's carried. Is it? Yes.
Just mention one thing, we don't make decisions here. So it's
I
our view.
I did actually read out that we're going to tell the execs.
Yeah, just to clarify, yes. Executive will consider your report or the report that you've had a say in modifying. We'll consider that report, and obviously we will consider this discussion as well before we make a decision.
Well, I should ask if anyone was against. Okay, thank you.
I'll just clarify, so that's a clear recommendation, and do you also want to say something about lobbying national government as a recommendation? That's the second recommendation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
it would be helpful if you were to make that recommendation, that second recommendation.
Can I clarify on how and who is going to do the lobbying in that sense?
I mean, I think we can all do it, actually, Andrew.
Yes. sorry, whether there's a formal recommendation, say the lead. I mean, yes, I'm sure we can all, but whether there is, you know, a formal action that the leader or the chair of the committee or something will write.
I guess that if you're asking the council to lobby, Pauline's right, you can all do it yourself individually, but the expectation would be I would write a letter to the government. And if you want to make that as one of your recommendations, that will be one of the things that would be considered by the executive alongside the report and your comments.
Alison.
So this doesn't quite make sense to me. We're asking, I don't know what the executive are going to decide, obviously, but we're asking Stephen to lobby the government to bring through restrictions that we don't want to put in place here at the moment.
Well, as I understand it, we don't want to make those restrictions because it puts us at a disadvantage to, say, Reading or Bracknell. So somebody on a bus could be going past our bus stops and then the Reading bus stops. So that's a direct comparison, isn't it? I mean, there are lots of other places where you can advertise, but that is a direct comparison.
As I understood it, the conversation earlier was about how if these restrictions that the report was suggesting were included in national legislation, they'd be applied across all councils. And that would be, well, yeah, that would be, in a sense, surely for those who want to see those restrictions, a positive thing, not a negative thing.
Pauline?
Just to put on the record that I don't know about anybody else here because we haven't discussed each of these recommendations one at a time. There are some of them I agree with and there are some of them I don't agree with. So I certainly would not be comfortable with asking the government to ban some of the things that we've talked about banning advertising on. But I would be completely with Andrew on gambling, for example. So I think it's down to the executive to decide what they want to lobby the government on. We haven't discussed each individual thing. I wouldn't, personally, I'm not encouraging them to just have a blanket lobby on all of these things. I think they need to consider it themselves. If you want my view, I'd be very happy to give you it.
Interested in your view, Pauline?
Can I just off the back of that, because I think as Gemma said, we are potentially maybe possibly expecting revisions to the national guidance to be published at some point, whenever that might be.
They were originally October, then November, and now we're thinking early next year. So at some point.
So at some point we might expect, potentially, hopefully. What I would suggest then maybe is that's probably the appropriate time once we know what the scope of the next round of changes is to then start to think, are there things in there that we would want to see potentially added for future revisions once we know what the next round of guidance is likely to be. As opposed to, I think to Pauline's point, there's some things on the list that I would agree with, some things on the list I don't agree with. And I think we just need to get that next round. If the government is already in the process of tightening up that national guidance, then it would apply to all councils everywhere who have that national guidance. So we'd all be in the same ship together, preferably not a cruise ship, because, you know.
I didn't think you said ship.
No, quite clear. But we'd all be in the same boat together. Plane, whatever.
But not a cruise boat.
But not a cruise boat. But my point being, I think if we wait for that national guidance to come out that then says how they're going to look to tidy it up, gambling, I don't like gambling at all, but the various social lotteries that, all various organisations are doing in our own one, for example, I'm less against advertising. But I think that's what I would prefer to see is clear recommendations gone to executive and what we agree with, and then we wait for the next round of guidance to come out and what those changes might be, and then we can make those tightening up, because it apply to everybody.
They'll probably consult anyway.
You live in hope. Well, be to me, if they do consult on here are the changes that are coming down, I'm looking at Gemma, that would be, if there is a consultation, or whether it's just in a revision, but if there is a consultation, that would strike me as the time that we would then be able to do it, or is it just a list?
I thought they would have done it by now, bearing in mind they've gone backwards a couple of times, but I mean, clearly, if something happens, we can respond.
Okay, thank you. Has anyone got anything else to say? Okay, well, thank you very much, and thank you to Stephen and the officers for coming and presenting that. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Not so fast, Madam Chairman.
We got that stuff to do. Right.
We still have a few more to go.
Yeah. Okay, not good night to the councillors then. Page 41. The Executive Forward Programme. Yeah. So has anyone got anything to say on this page? I can't see the page. Oh, 41.
No, not 41.
Right.
Yeah, just to say that Westmead, the first article on 41, did go through HOSC in August.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone, did you say that before? Or somebody else? Yes, you did, didn't you? Page 42. Sorry.
Just a very quick question on 41 about the Public Spaces Protection Order. I know there's quite wide-ranging things. I was just wondering whether it has gone to scrutiny. And it says here on this bit that it's just relating to antisocial vehicle use. Is it that sort of narrow scope that it's looking at? Because I know there's been some quite controversial plans in other places where it's been much broader.
This is just a renewal of the existing order, which had been agreed before, and I think that did go through a scrutiny process. So I think it's assumed that, as this is a renewal rather than an extension, its geographical scope is not expanding, it's simply a renewal.
Ask Stephen a question. Why does it have to be renewed, as a matter of curiosity? Isn't it?
Because the original order was time limited, and so you're required to review it and then decide whether you want to continue with it.
I'm just wondering if you could change it so it's not time limited, and then you wouldn't have to waste your time on it again until you wanted to change it.
It's a good question, but one I don't know the answer to.
It was my understanding from the past, happy to be proven wrong, they have to be time-bound.
I suspect that's correct. I think it's a legal requirement, I think.
Okay, page 42. Page 43. Advertising, oh, that's today. No, that's the executive meeting we're talking about. Advertising policy. Yes, page 44. Page 45.
Just on 45, for those on CCOS, Gray's Farm, having chatted this through earlier, will stay on the November meeting. Might be the October meeting.
20th of November.
No, it's coming to November CCOS. It's going to stay on the agenda for CCOS because it's going to the November executive, so it's going to make for a long evening, but there are other items we're going to move off that agenda.
Alison.
On page 44, where 1521 Optalis business updates going to the executive, and it says HOSC. Well, yes, at the last HOSC meeting, we did welcome the CEO of Optalis and Wes Hedger. However, I wouldn't say we had a business activity and transparency of the financial performance. There was a good overview of what they provided, and it was great hearing about the Hollies, etc. But I really would not say that overview and scrutiny committee were really looking at the financial performance. We didn't have spreadsheets or anything that gave us that insight. So I think it's it's not appropriate to put that it went through that particular item went through HOSC.
I guess, Alison, it depends on whether we're going to get the same report. I would imagine we will get the same report that you looked at. Yeah, I would imagine we're not going to get a different report. So it may be that this is badged in a way that you think is inappropriate rather than...
Well, possibly
we're not going to get a
awareness and
different
transparency of financial... It said the report will give you, the executive, enable you to have awareness and transparency of the financial performance. So I really hope you're going to get a very different report.
Okay, anything on page 46? Andrew?
Yeah, I don't know if anyone here will be able to answer this. It's the Woking Borough Council School Organisational Plan. That hasn't come to children's. We've had things which might be similar. I don't know whether anyone, if this is essentially a broader version of the school place planning strategy or anything like that, because basically wondering whether we should see that at scrutiny before, or whether it's an amalgamation of other reports that we have seen. But I suspect I might need to take that with Prue or Emma. Is that right?
You suspect correctly.
Okay.
One and only, and possibly last, experience of Children's Services opening a scrutiny committee reminded me of how little I know about the area and how much in awe I am of all the members of the committee who seem to know a lot.
Okay, page 47. Page 48. Okay, everybody happy with that?
Surely the MTFP, Treasury Management, they're going to go through corporate and community. Yeah, so it should be in the OS column to show that.
Yeah, on this one, you've got CNC.
Yeah, they're already forward programmed in.
Yeah, we should be in the...
Oh, sorry, I was flicking between two pages. Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, agreed.
There's a missing...
Otherwise, you can go down the column and think hardly anything's gone through ONS, whereas we know it is programmed that one of our committees will be looking at these.
Yes, I'll make those changes.
Can we go on to the individual executive member forward programme? Page 51. And page 52. Okay.
Just to inform you, I think the date, sorry, that's right.
Pauline?
Bearing in mind the government's ability to call something something that is exactly the opposite of modernising and improving the administration of council tax. Do you know what that actually is? It's 9th of October.
Okay, ONS draft work programmes. Page 56, Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. That's us. Neil, I think you said that the WBC headquarters, you weren't sure yet whether that's coming. You haven't had confirmation.
That's correct.
But AI and emerging technology is. And then in November, I think you said that voluntary and charitable sector is going to move to January.
That is also correct, Chair.
Is the... I might have missed this. Is the consolidated budget not coming to the management committee? I can't remember what we did last year. Did we not have a consolidated position that came through the management committee rather than just CCOS? So all the CCOS had its say on each of the budget, and then there was an update back to the management committee, or is it only done through CCOS?
In previous years, it's just gone through CCOS, and then the committee writes a report at the end of it, which gets circulated.
Pauline.
Question for Neil. I'm going to ask the same questions I've asked several times before because I get confused. The partnership with VCS, is that the one that I asked for more than a year ago and it's going back again?
There was an interim report, and then this is the follow-up report.
But it didn't answer the question.
Hopefully this will.
So why is it going back?
Well, officers have told me they can't meet that earlier date, and that's the most suitable date for them to do the work.
So I'd just like to protest, rather. We've been waiting for a long time for that, and it's going back.
Shall I? I'll ask officers to contact you directly to explain what's happening. Okay.
Okay, where are we? Page 57. Carol. Hi.
Thank you. It's just under the 2nd February items, council motions and petitions. It's just the wording. It sounds as if we're looking at the progress of how we are against motions and petitions. I understand what you're trying to say there, but I think the wording could be improved.
This is the copy editor's hat. Yeah. I suppose on motions and petitions, progress at responding to,
resulting from.
I'll get the thesaurus out.
Yeah. Progress progress in addressing. Thank you, Carol. Children's Services. Sorry, Pauline.
One other question for Neil. How do we, related to motions and petitions, how do we monitor all the promises that are given at full council and other council meetings for things that are going to turn up in due course? Because I think there's quite a few outstanding.
It's a good question. This is how we deal with motions and petitions, but the other stuff, I don't think there's any particular process at the moment.
So my recollection when I was an executive member was that there was a process, and that, or maybe it was just me and highways, but it feels to me like if somebody promises something, we should be clearly keeping a tick list of what's been promised, when it's meant to be coming, to the individual or to whatever it is, whatever the promise is, and whether it's actually been delivered or not.
We are reminded by Democratic Services, I think, or it may be council officers in the relevant directorate, of any supplementary answers we promised to give. Are you referring to that?
I've got a little list of
I
things
feared you may have.
Of things that we haven't had, that we've been promised at various times. It's not exhaustive because I wasn't keeping a list, because when I was exec member for Highways, I remember being nagged by Democratic Services about things that I'd promised to do. And I'm just wondering if Democratic Services do still have that process. Can we see the list maybe? Or...
I do get nagged, but I'm not sure I can recall by whom.
Yeah, it would be useful to make, it's not just about motions and petitions, it's wider, I think is what I'm saying. I don't expect to go through them all here because it will be probably a long list, but I don't have confidence that that process is working properly.
So we do remind executive members of promises and statements made, but we don't have a comprehensive list, and I'll take that back to the team and discuss how we might improve that process for the members' benefit.
Thank you, that'd be really useful. I think, yeah, residents' benefit, yeah, exactly. And I think keeping a record of whether they've been delivered, as well as reminding people, would be useful as well. So thank you.
And then we can also brag about it. Okay, page 59. Anybody happy with this, Andrew? Page 60. Page 61.
I would just add that there, just in case people want to know, there's on the November meeting there has been an item added. The chief executive of the academy chain that running Oak Bank is coming to the committee, so we are speaking to him. So, yeah.
Ooh, I might even dial in.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask. We'll maybe check if. I mean, I'm sure you'd be welcome to attend, but I might see if ward councillors might be. Well, I can invite you to speak if you want. So, yeah. Is that the 18th of March? No, the 10th of November. It's the next one. It's the first item on the agenda. So, and it's in the public part of the meeting as well. The chief executive of the Green Shore Learning Trust, which are the trusts which have just taken over Oak Bank School. So, yeah. Which was why we were a bit worried about adding that in, because I think that would be quite a potentially big item. But I think in the timeliness of all the things, I think it was important to get it in there. That said, although it often looks like a big agenda, some of the things are quite quick, like the forward plan, the action tracker, and those kind of, and actually the schools causing concern will probably be a smaller item if.
Because you've only got 3 more.
Because it won't have Oak Bank.
Yeah.
Is that right, that you've only got 3 more meetings this council year?
Yeah, we had one.
November, January and March?
Yeah, we had one last week, so...
well, no wonder you have such big agendas when you haven't got many meetings.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, climate emergency overview and scrutiny. Yes, Carol.
Tried to get in before you said that last title. It's the same comment again. 12th of January, it says to review progress against the strategy. Maybe we could just look at the wording or do a search and replace on against.
Global change.
I'll look into it.
65?
Few things.
Yeah, go on.
Few things will slip and change. I think from today's briefing, we're going to kind of work through what that might be. You're going to change it again, aren't you?
No, I just noticed the leader of the Liberal Democrats is working for the council, apparently, on our speed limit policy.
Ed Davey.
The temptation of mentioning lycra and brass bands is extreme.
Ed Day, yes.
I don't think he's coming to that meeting anyway. Yeah, certainly not Ed Davey. Yeah, there's a few things we're just trying to work through on shaping up the final agenda, although the 29th of October is not a budget meeting as it currently stands. I say that with the caveat of as it currently stands. But there are, as we go through this, if more time is needed to bring things back in, then we may well, trying to avoid having additional meetings as we look through the budget. But there are some things that will come up. We'll go through it in more detail next week, but certainly there are some changes for the 4th of November and for the 25th of November as we just try to move things around to give sufficient time on the budget. Pauline, sorry.
It might just be worth going through some of these things and seeing, well, it's not just that, it's also a lot of these things, okay, they're going to come to scrutiny, but there's an awful lot of work goes into these things. If we're really desperate to save a significant amount of money, it might just be worth looking at these things to see, prioritise them based on the financial imperatives that are going to hit us like a steam train or whatever sort of train it is, and maybe prioritising those and actually stopping some of the other stuff to try and focus on the funding. I think it's just a thought.
Okay, where have I got to?
Yes.
So to be clear, I'm not worried about this. It's not the committee I'm bothered about. It's the amount of time the officers are putting into something that might then get derailed.
So what I can say is we had a chair's briefing today on the next sort of 3 to 4 months, and I've made similar comments myself on things that we can move, things that basically what you've just said, and that needs to be worked through. So I'm hoping that we might have an update on some of that. Oh no, really? I'll keep going. I agree with your comment. I think we're not in a position to know, but what I've also said is don't burn huge amounts of time producing long, complicated, detailed reports on things when this committee is, verbal updates, presentations, light, plus we still don't know what else might shake out the tree as a result of everything else.
Yeah, and I think it's not just about that committee, it's about don't spend an awful lot of time doing a very long paper on something that we're not going to do.
Agreed. I was trying to make that point badly.
Okay.
Sorry,
Alison.
So on page 67, I think that's where we're at, is that right? Yes. The 25th of November, when Mark's committee is scrutinising children's, adults, social care and children's services, I think it's usual to invite members of HOSC and Children's Services to come along and would we be welcome to ask questions? By permission of the chairman.
I think I said the same thing last year. I welcome it because it's the quirks of how we do budget scrutiny here that CCOS does the budget scrutiny, and yet we've got children's services. And to Stephen's point earlier, I'm in awe of anybody on that committee with the knowledge that they build up. So, yes, in answer to your question.
Pauline?
And I think that was the decision we made, or at least the view we had when we discussed whether budget scrutiny should be discussed at C&C or whether it should be at the individual scrutiny committees, that it's sensible to have people who know more about it to be able to ask.
I think you know my views on where this is set up. So in the same way that I've just made that comment about, in response to Alison's comment on children's services, it's the same with adult social care as well. We need the experts in the room who are used to scrutinising this day in, day out. And it's just the quirks of our setup that everything runs through CCOS rather than individual scrutiny.
And to be clear, I think it should, but I think a wider church is better in terms of the expertise.
Yeah, I think we're in broad agreement. I would say so. I'm not. Yes. If you want, we'll get those invites circulated round and might need to move to a bigger room. I have no objection. Sorry, a little bit distracted. I've got no objection to in-person. Might be easier on some of them. I think we just need to be very clear on how we're dealing with page numbers and usual things.
Sorry, just wondering how many people you might end up coming to that meeting as to whether that would work. But I would be interested in coming if possible.
I think last year we said certainly chair and vice chair of each of those committees. I'm not entirely sure it would be helpful to have the entirety of each scrutiny committee attending. No, I don't think they would either. I think we certainly said at the very least chair or vice chair, chair and vice chair of each scrutiny would be more than welcome in person. I think I'm flexible, providing we can secure a big enough space. Well, sorry, I'm not. Sorry. Just to be clear, I'm not. I guess it's a balance of I don't think we want the entirety of every committee turning up, but it's also not just going one or two. All voices welcome. Not wanting to exclude anyone from that process.
I think, may I suggest if you're going to turn up, notify the chairman, and then they can make the appropriate change to the room would be sensible.
Thank you.
Oh, well
Sorry,
done.
that was just completely throwing my head out.
In the handbag, I suspected it would be. Does that answer?
Right, okay. Have we finished with CCOS? Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee on page 69. Page 70. Page 71. Alison, have you got anything? No? Page 72. Right, page 72. Okay, done with that. Agenda item 34. Action tracker. Anybody got anything to say on page 73? Page 74. Not much to say there. Right. Thank you very much. Well, it really is good night now. Yes. Phew, got there.